Alright, I am back with another video, and today we are doing an updated Pyromancer build. I've done a few of these in the past, mainly Pact of the Fiend, Warlocks, and Evocation Wizards, some Sorcerers. I've done various fire-themed builds, but I don't believe I've ever actually just done a full, proper Pyromancer Sorcerer, which is probably because it seems like the obvious thing to do, so I probably stayed away from it at the time, but now I want to come back to it, because I love Pyromancer type characters. I think if I'm ever going to play like a full caster character, I usually like to play like an Elemental Mancer, like a Hydromancer, Electromancer, whatever, and the Pyromancer is by far the most iconic, and I really wanted to take this concept all the way now that we have the new Mistress mods. But I didn't really just want to say, here's all the fire spells, have fun. I wanted to do something interesting with it. So I went back and kind of took some inspiration from the idea of the Phoenix, you know, the firebird that resurrects upon death and is basically immortal through rebirth. And I was thinking, like, oh yeah, you know, that could be really cool. It could be like a similar theme to like the Final Fantasy 16 inspired build that I did, which was a Pact of the Fiend Warlock, where I could do something different, you know, based it off of Joshua from that game, stuff like that. And then I kind of shifted to a different kind of more D&D based lore background. So you guys know how Githyanki, once they reach their, you know, high enough standing in Vlaakith's army, they become the Red Dragon Riders. I used this concept for my Vlaakith deity build, in which I did actually use Draconic Bloodline Sorcerer in that build as well. But that got me thinking, what if we had someone who was really, really high up in Vlaakith's army, got infused with the dragon blood to make them more powerful like they do, got their own Red Dragon, and then not betrayed Vlaakith, but maybe disobeyed her orders, displeased her somehow, and as such, had their ranking stripped, their dragon killed in front of them, severing that link, and then ended up being thrown into some sort of Githyanki prison, or maybe had to do trial by combat or something, where they were left brutally scarred, and as such were only able to escape because they got picked up by the Nautiloid during an invasion by the Mind Flayers, which is how they ended up in the Nautiloid at the start of the game. And I thought, that actually sounds really interesting. Basically, a fallen from grace Githyanki who is now dead set on revenge against Vlaakith, making a storyline with laezel potentially very interesting. And because maybe, and hear me out on this, maybe when their dragon was killed, the soul of the dragon didn't really go away. Because the blood of that dragon was still infused into this Githyanki mage, they actually became one. And the longer lifespan of the dragon combined with their incredible power basically fused into this semi-immortal Githyanki whose flames burn so hot, but even when they go down, they rise again and again. And that's what I think would be really, like, kind of an interesting concept for a build, so that's what I went for. And because we're playing with this, like, idea that we're playing a Githyanki, where maybe the dragon blood actually enhances their basic Githyanki abilities, so their psionics, and the spells they get from their racial features, you can make a really interesting, like, kind of psychic pyromancer, which I think is bloody awesome. Isn't it like Pyrokinesis? Ooh, Pyrokinesis build. That's going in the title. Anyways, that was a very long intro and lore explanation, so let's get right into the build. Surprise, surprise, we're going to be kicking things off as a Draconic Bloodline Sorcerer. This is going to give us access to a ton of different things, namely Constitution Saving Throw Proficiency, which we do absolutely want, as well as a bunch of cantrips and spells, so let's talk about that right away. Well, I say right away, we're going to talk about the fact that we're playing a Githyanki first. This is going to give us a ton of amazing things. Number one, Astral Knowledge, giving us proficiency in all skills of a chosen ability once per long rest until your next long rest. This is going to make us great as the face of a party, where if we have, you know, high charisma, we don't actually need to spec into the charisma-based skills with our starting skill proficiencies. We can just get every skill proficiency in charisma whenever we want to. However, we can also use this for intelligence and wisdom as well, even strength if we really need to. However, I didn't really build this like as a warrior of Githyanki, although there is some Gish potential in here. This is more meant to be a pure spellcaster that kind of wears armor. Because if we go down here, ignoring the fact that we do get Mage Hand, but it's only once per long rest, so it's not great, we do actually get Martial Prodigy, which gives you armor proficiency with light and medium armor, as well as proficiencies with short swords, long swords, and great swords. Like, Githyanki are just one of the most busted races in this game by far. Makes me a little bit sad about Dragonborn, but hey, mods will fix that, I'm sure. So, with this, we're going to have access to, as a sorcerer, medium armor, which as you can see I am using, as well as the ability to use the 3 swords, which there will be options for long swords and great swords in this build, which I think will be appropriate. Of course, with this build, you could use any of the typical magic casting gear. Potent Robe, Marker Heshkir, Staff of Spell Power, that's all available to you, and that would still be powerful. You can absolutely use those on this build if you like, but I do want to propose a slightly more Githyanki alternative, if that makes sense. So we're going to be making use of all of the racial features today. Obviously, we're going to be kicking things off as a sorcerer, like I said, giving us access to 4 cantrips, and I have chosen these 4. Firebolt is going to be our standard damage cantrip, dealing up to 3d10 of fire damage by the time the build is said and done, but a 1d10 at this level is still going to be really, really good. It's our bread and butter ranged cantrip. Next up, Green Flame Blade. This is here because it's a fire cantrip that can work with our sword. It does still use our actual hit modifier from our physical stats, so we're not really going to get a lot out of this unless we're using a finesse-based weapon, but if you do end up using a short sword, or whatever, you absolutely can make use out of this, so I would say pick it up if you're going that route. Otherwise you can pick something else, but I did still find this useful in my testing even with our lower stats, because the extra damage, and it's about a 50% chance to hit on average even with our low stats if you're using a higher level weapon, so I do feel like it's worth it, but you can swap this out if you like. Friends is here because of the psionic stuff. We gain advantage on charisma checks against non-hostile creatures. And Mind Sliver. This is going to be our psychic side of things, allowing us to throw a psychic spike into a creature's mind, inflicting a negative 1d4 penalty to saving throws until the end of your next turn. This is great because a lot of our fire-based spells have saving throws, Fireball being an obvious example, so making your enemies have a Bane-esque penalty against their saving throws is actually great, and the fact that this is in the form of a cantrip, which we could cast with something like Quicken Spell from Sorcerer, then be able to use this as a bonus action and then fire off a Fireball in the same turn with that saving throw penalty, it's actually a really, really nice combo. And for the record, obviously, all of these extra spells are coming from the Mistress Spell mod, which is available on all platforms, as well as any mod you see in this video, it is available on console. So we'll keep going from here. Next up, spells. Our level 1 spell choices aren't exactly that great if we're just focusing on what we're trying to get done here, because we go with our Draconic Bloodline here, picking up the red Draconic Ancestry, giving us access to the fire-based features that we'll get later on, as well as Burning Hands as a level 1 spell. So we pretty much have the main kind of level 1 fire spell that we want, dealing 3d6 fire damage at a cone in front of us, which is really nice. Otherwise, you could pick Wild Magical Storm, but of course we're going with Draconic Bloodline here. So that leaves us with 2 spells. Now, obviously, if we lean into the psychic side of things, we do actually have a couple of options we can pick up here. I would say Catapult makes a lot of sense. Basically become somewhat like a Jedi and fling things with your mind, I guess. We also have ID Insinuation, which can deal 1d12 psychic damage with a torrent of conflicting desires that can leave the target incapacitated if they fail a wisdom save. But you do need to maintain concentration, so it's a high amount of psychic damage and a pretty significant debuff on a single enemy, but it does take up that concentration, meaning it might not be as useful at later levels. There's obviously Chromatic Orb as well if you want a slightly different fire-based attack, and Thunderwave for like a psychic blast push away from you. I have here Shield and Absorb Elements, because I do think these two are great spells to have in reserve. Shield will raise your AC so that you're less likely to be hit by weapon attacks and such, raising your armor class by 5 in a pinch, and Absorb Elements, if you get hit with an AoE spell that requires a saving throw, you can gain resistance to the damage type of that spell and then do an additional 1d6 of that element type on your next attack. So overall, with both of these spells, you have a pretty powerful defensive package. You're safe from attack rolls, and you take way less damage from AoE effects. So I think both of these together make a strong defensive core, and I recommend picking these up, especially since you get to level 2 pretty much straight away, so you'll be able to expand your spell options pretty quickly. For the Draconic Bloodline, I've gone with this one with the scale red 5 colour to create this nice look on the face here. Thought I'd just point that out. And then finally, the ability scores. We have an interesting selection here. It's pretty standard for a sorcerer, but we do have a 17 in charisma here, because we're going to be bumping this up later, because we do actually use, to get the most out of this build, the hair of Auntie Ethel. I do think this character would go to any lengths to get revenge on Vlaakith, even if that means making deals with various fae, including Ethel herself, who is a hag, so we do want that +1 to charisma from Ethel's hair. It's not 100% necessary to get. It does just make it a bit more awkward to take a feat in this build that I actually do want to take, but it's not a required feat, so you could just absolutely ignore this and pop a 16 here and take 2 ability score improvements later into charisma, or use a piece of equipment to max it out. But if you have the hair free, it does optimize this build in a nice way that gives us a nice little bonus as we get towards the end. Next up, dexterity is at 16. We do want this for our armor class. Constitution is at 14, and realistically you can swap these about. If you're not using a piece of medium armor that uncaps the AC that you can get from it, then I would say running with a 16 constitution and just a 14 in dexterity would probably be better overall, because that gives you better concentration saving throws. But with the setup that we have here, I've never really had an issue with concentration, because either we're not getting hit because we have a decent piece of armor and a decent amount of AC from our dexterity, and even when we do get hit, because we have con save proficiency, our constitution is usually pretty damn good, so I'm not too worried about it. Strength and intelligence are at 8 because we don't need either of them, but I would definitely recommend maybe grabbing the Potions of Hill Giant Strength if you want to make this a bit more of a gish build, because funnily enough, even though we don't get extra attack as a feature in this build, because we have Green Flame Blade, or Booming Blade if you decide to take that as well, with Sorcerer you can use your Metamagic Quicken spell to actually make a weapon attack as a bonus action by using these cantrips. So technically you could go for a more gishy build if you A, either use a short sword with your dex, or B, go for the potions of strength there and use a longsword or greatsword. So you have options there as well. Could be a quite fun alternative to the build. And wisdom is at 10 because it's our dump stat. Well, it's not our dump stat, but it is our stat where we put our little extra bit of points. Next up, we have our skill proficiencies. So, because I took the soldier background, we're going to be getting athletics and intimidation, so I went with deception and persuasion, meaning that you can use your astral knowledge on either intelligence or wisdom to just get better checks across the board with all of them. Wisdom might be the better one since we set that at 10, but if you wanted to put your intelligence to 10 instead of your wisdom, then you could make use of all of these, or you could go for your dex-based checks like acrobatics, sleight of hand, and stealth if you need to be a little bit sneaky. It's entirely up to you. Astral knowledge will give you a lot of freedom here, but like I said, these are the stats that I've gone with with the background that we have. So, let's move on. Coming in at level 2, we're going to be grabbing another spell. And like I said, it's entirely up to you what you want to grab here. You could grab Enhanced Sleep, but we do get that from the base Githyanki skill set, so we don't actually really need to pick that up here. I would say either go with Catapult or ID Insinuation, as those have been kind of suggested already. Entirely up to you. I think I'm going to go with Catapult, although you might find yourself replacing spells a lot in this build, so you'll have to pick and choose as you level up. But of course, at level 2, we do get our Metamagic, allowing us to gain 2 different Metamagic options at this level. I go with Twinned and Careful Spell. We have a lot of AoE fire attacks with this build, so Careful Spell is a great way of making sure that our allies don't take as much damage, as well as the fact that Twin Spell will allow us to target 2 creatures with our spells. I mean, it's fairly simple. So I do quite like these 2, but we're going to have the opportunity to pick up a lot more Metamagic options a bit later. Next up, at Sorcerer 3, we're going to gain access to level 2 spells, and because of Mistress Spells, we have a lot of options available to us, so let's have a look at what we have. In the vanilla game, we have 2 options that I think would be on theme. Obviously, Misty Step. We get Misty Step once per long rest, as a Githyanki anyway. This would just allow us to use it more, and as a mage, that maneuverability is great. Obviously, there's also Scorching Ray, a big damage fire attack that can attack multiple enemies. However, we also have access to Agnesar's Scorcher. This is a fire spell that comes from a dragon. It's from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, if I remember correctly, which deals a big line of fire damage, dealing 3d8, which can do a lot of damage and works with a dex save. So there's pros and cons to using this and Scorching Ray, so it's up to you. There's also Dragon's Breath, which allows you to do 3d6 fire damage in a cone in front of you, but this one requires concentration because you can cast it subsequently multiple times after the initial cast as long as you maintain that concentration, but I do think that concentration is better spent on other things, so I actually don't recommend it here. Ironically enough, I do think the other dragon-based fire spell is a bit better, but we do have other really cool options for the Githyanki side of things too. There is Mental Barrier, which whenever you would fail an Intelligence, Wisdom or Charisma saving throw, you can gain advantage on those saving throws and resistance to psychic damage until the start of your next trial. Next turn. You use this as a reaction similar to Shield or Absorb Elements, and it's basically the Githyanki instant defense spell against Mind Flayers, so it feels very on theme here. And since the Githyanki themselves use psionics and we're planning to go against the Githyanki with this character, it actually makes a ton of sense to pick this one up lore-wise, so I absolutely would if you're interested. But also Mind Spike, which allows you to deal a big dollop of psychic damage and prevent the target from turning invisible, useful in certain fights. There's also Shadow Blade, allowing us to conjure a shadowy short sword that deals psychic damage. Does require our concentration, but is still a good option. If you want to talk about other summoned weapons, we have Moonblade, which I've used in a lot of builds. This will allow us to summon a magical flaming or chilling short sword, so it would use our dexterity, and it would increase our armor class by 1, give us resistance to the damage type that we picked, so in our case it will most likely be fire, and sheds a bright light. It also comes with a bonus attack that is like an attack that's unique to it, so that's another cool option there if you want. We also have things like Tasha's Mind Whip, another psychic damage attack, Vortex Warp, which I'm sure will have some usage. There's so many cool things you can take here, but I'm going to try and focus on the dragon element as much as I can, as I do feel like that's cool. However, there are a bunch of cool psychic options here that I think you can also consider. We do also get another Metamagic at this point, and we're going to be taking Quicken Spell, but don't worry, we will have the opportunity to get more stuff later, but Quicken Spell is just so great because it allows us to use a spell as a bonus action. At this point we're level 3, so we also get Enhanced Sleep from Githyanki. And at this point, like I say, you can start replacing spells if you feel like some of the earlier level spells are not really helping you that much. If you think maybe like something like Absorb Elements is a bit redundant when you have Shield, or maybe Catapult just isn't doing that much for you, maybe you're just not able to make as much use of the environment as you would like, but I would say swapping it out for a more consistent level 2 spell absolutely makes sense. I did take Mental Barrier in my testing, but I did find it was a bit too niche, as it does work on very few encounters. It's really good against the Assassin's Ball that can use the Stunning Gaze action. It's very useful against them, but otherwise, unless you're fighting Mind Flayers in like the very end of Act 3, it is a very niche spell. So I would actually recommend maybe taking Mind Spike for a big level 2 psychic damage attack. It does use a concentration, but I do think that 3d6 psychic damage can be pretty potent as just a one-off big damage thing. But if you don't like that, there is Tasha's Mind Whip, which technically does a little bit less on average, but I do still think it can be pretty good, especially since it can stop targets from taking bonus actions or reactions for 1 turn. So I would say it's either or, pick your favourite here, but I do think Mind Spike did do a lot of damage for me when I was using it, so I'm gonna go with that. Next up, we do get to choose another cantrip, and I'm going to grab Mage Hand so that we have that permanently. We also do get to pick another spell at this level, and I don't know how I forgot to mention this, but because of the 2024 D&D spell list revision, which got turned into a mod that is available on all platforms, you do actually get access to Flame Blade and Flaming Sphere as well. Flame Blade would be another amazing option to synergize with our fire stuff, so if you wanted to go with that here, you absolutely could. Otherwise, again, we have access to other spells, and I am going to take Scorching Ray because it's a classic. We also do get to pick a feat at this level, our first one. Now at this point you should have RTFL's hair or are about to get it, so we don't need to worry about our charisma just yet. We'll have an 18 charisma at level 4, which is very good. I think it's more important at this point to pick up Elemental Adept Fire. This is going to make it so that our spells and attacks ignore resistance to a damage type of our choice, that being fire, and when we cast spells of that type we cannot roll a 1. Now you might find that this doesn't have that much value when we actually are going to have psychic attacks as well, but I do find that because fire is so often resisted across D&D and BG3, just having the ability to bypass that resistance, especially in my testing against like Steel Watchers and stuff like that, is just so good. It basically lets you use your whole kit freely, because there are going to be things that like resist fire damage and are also immune to psychic damage. A lot of automatons like the Steel Watchers do that, so I think Elemental Adept is a really good way to get around this build's big glaring weakness. And again, because of the Hair of Ethel, we won't need to worry about having that higher charisma stat yet, so I just think taking this now is the way to go. At Sorcerer level 5, we're going to gain access to level 3 spells, as well as Misty Step, once per long rest, as a bonus action from our Githyanki racial stuff. But now we have level 3 spells. Boy, do we have a lot of options. Let's talk about them. Obviously, the classic Fireball gives us 8d6 fire damage in a big explosion with a dex saving throw. You all know what Fireball does. It's a big ball of fuck you. Next up, Ashalden's Stride, another fire-based dragon spell. Allows you to, with your concentration, surround yourself in billowing flames that burn creatures within 2 meters for 1d6 fire damage. Doesn't sound too impressive, but let's keep reading. It increases your movement speed by 6 meters, and moving no longer provokes opportunity attacks. So you can quickly cast this if you need to get out of a sticky situation, dash around dealing fire damage as you go. It feels very dragon-y to just be able to turn into a ball of fire and just move around the arena, so I quite like this one. There's also Melf's Minute Meteors. Conjure 6 flaming meteors that can be thrown at enemies to explode in a 2 meter radius, dealing 2 to 12 fire damage. It has a dex save attached to it and its concentration. You may be thinking, well, that's not great, but here's the thing. You cast this, and you get 6 of these meteors that you use as a bonus action. So cast this, throw these as a bonus action, and spam fireballs or firebolts or whatever have you as your main action. Just dealing a ton of, just basically it's 2d12 extra fire damage on each of your turns. Just as long as you can hit it, which I think is really, really good. So I'm going to be taking this one here. We'll come back for the others later. But of course, we can replace a spell at this point, and again, maybe you feel like something like Absorb Elements isn't really doing it for you. Especially since we're going to be getting resistance to fire damage probably around this point anyway. I'll explain more about that when we get to the equipment section. So let's grab Fireball, again, because it's a classic. At Sorcerer level 6, we're going to gain access to Elemental Affinity Damage, meaning that whenever we cast a spell of the Fire type, which we're going to be doing a lot, we add our Charisma modifier to the damage. That's a lot of damage. We're also going to get Elemental Affinity Resistance, which sucks. Never use it. You basically, whenever you cast a fire spell, you can spend 1 sorcery point to gain resistance to that damage type. We don't want to be spending our sorcery points on this. The resistance is not permanent, so we're not going to be using this feature pretty much ever. I'm going to get us a piece of equipment that is going to give us fire resistance, so you don't need to worry about it. So we do get to pick another spell at this level, and because I made a case for it, I'm going to go with Ashalden's Stride. There's obviously Counterspell and Haste as well, but we'll get Haste another way, and Counterspell, obviously, you can take up a bit later if you like. There's also Flame Arrows, and this build does have a bow, so you could go with that, but I don't think it's exactly worth it on this build. And like I say, Flame Blade, Moon Blade, all that other stuff is possible, so pick your favourites. At Sorcerer level 7, we're going to gain access to level 4 spells. Of course, that means we have the obvious Wall of Fire, but there is another spell that's been added that we could pick. Well, I mean, there's actually a few. There's other psychic spells here. You can go for Psionic Blast for a big force damage thing that pushes people away. Intellect Fortress, these are level 3 spells, I just totally forgot to mention them, which can give yourself resistance to psychic damage as well as advantage on intelligence, wisdom and charisma saves. There's Rowlathim's Psychic Lance, which will deal 7d6 psychic damage and can potentially incapacitate your enemies on an intelligence save, which not many enemies can make, so that can be really powerful. There's Illusory Weapon, which can have all kinds of shenanigans. Really, it's entirely up to you. I'm going to take the most thematic option here and just grab Wall of Fire now, but again, you can continue to replace spells if you find you're not using something from the lower level nearly as much. But I'm going to take the Wall of Fire spell for now. At Sorcerer level 8, we do get to choose another spell, and if we really want to lean into the psychic aspect of things, I do like picking up Psionic Blast here. It's going to deal that 5d8 force damage and possibly knock enemies prone. It's basically a bigger version of Thunderwave that deals force damage, which I actually really like, so we are going to take it here. Again, you could replace a spell at this level if you want to, and we do get to pick our second feat / ability score improvement. Now, I don't think we need to hit 20 charisma just yet. That'll be a nice capstone for the build. What I want to do is I want to go all the way down here to the Tasha's Feat mod. Again, available on all consoles. These are more feats from the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything book. This allows us to pick up Metamagic Adept, which gives us 2 more sorcery points and 2 more Metamagic options. summons. This is just more of what Sorcerer wants to do. And I think Extended Spell, which can extend the duration of conditions, summons, and surfaces caused by spells, can be quite useful. Some of our spells we have extended effects on, so that can actually help out. So that's an option for you if you want it. Heightened Spell is also really good, making it so that enemies will have disadvantage on their saving throws against our spells, so things like Fireball suddenly become a lot more deadly, definitely having that. Distance Spell increases the range of our spells by 50%, with melee spells suddenly getting a range of 9 meters. This is really good as well, and Subtle Spell allowing you to cast spells while silenced. Silence won't come up often in this game, but when it does, it can really shut you down, so I think it's a good contingency plan to have, but honestly, pick your favourites. All of these are good for us. At Sorcerer 9, we're going to gain access to level 5 spells. Now, in the vanilla, there's not really many level 5 options for pyromancers. There is obviously Telekinesis, Hold Monster, and Dominate Person for the psychic side of things for us. However, by scrolling down here, we do get some more interesting options, shall we say. Now, for this next part, think about it like this. At this point, you've been fighting for a while. You'll probably be approaching Act 3 at this point at the least, if not you're already there. Meaning that you're kind of starting to get your strength back after being able to kind of go on this journey, and you're finally starting to feel that dragon within awaken, the soul of that dragon deep within you, bursting forth, and you are able to conjure its spirit to fight by your side. Like I say, this dragon is immortal, it ain't going anywhere without revenge. So this Summon Draconic Spirit spell is going to allow you to summon that red dragon to your aid. I mean, you can summon enough other elemental types of dragons as well, but of course we're going to summon the red dragon because it makes the most sense. You will gain fire resistance while you're next to it, but we will be getting that from a piece of equipment anyway. This is mainly here to just give us a goddamn dragon, as I said in my conjuration video, and it does a bunch of things. It has a rend attack, a multi-attack in which it combines a claw attack and a burning bite attack. It's got its fire breath, it can fly, and it can disguise itself as a Tressim, which is basically means you have a cat companion which can turn into a dragon. Beat that, fine familiar. So we're absolutely going to take that at this point. Next up at level 10, we're going to gain a cantrip. Really, it's kind of a pick your favourite situation. We got a fire cantrip here that is Create Bonfire. You're probably never going to use it, but hey, it's there. I mean, you got things like Sword Burst for force damage. That could actually be kind of fun if the enemies get in within melee range. I mean, there's a ton of things you could do here. In fact, Sword Burst actually feels a bit better, or Booming Blade. Up to you. We also do get to pick another level 5 or higher or lower spell at this point. And again, I've kind of gone over everything you could potentially take, but here's another big fire spell for you. Immolation. Immolation will do 8d6 of fire damage, plus an additional 4d6 of fire damage every subsequent turn, as long as you can maintain the concentration. There's a lot of concentration on this build, but it's pretty easy to pick and choose what you want to concentrate on in various scenarios. Immolating basically is that extra 4d6 fire damage that gets done every turn. Basically, and at the end of each of the enemy's turns that are affected by this, they make a dex save to potentially end the condition. So make sure you keep an eye on if the immolating condition ends, because it won't end your concentration, so you might get a bit tricked out into thinking it's still happening when it actually isn't. So make sure you keep an eye on that, but Immolation is a great spell for this type of build, and I would say if you really aren't using maybe like one of your lower level spells at this point, maybe Mind Spike ain't exactly doing it for you, or a Sheldon Stride, maybe you're not getting a lot of use out of that since you have better concentration options now, I would say grab a powerful psychic spell. Like I say, we have a few options. There's now Synaptic Static, which can detonate a psychic energies that inflicts targets with a negative 1d6 penalty to attack rolls, ability checks, and con saves. And it doesn't affect creatures with a less than 2 intelligence. That won't come up often. This is an amazing spell to grab, and we are going to be taking it here. It's a big damage psychic spell, but that 1d6 penalty to saving throws means that our fire spells are going to do a lot better. And again, it's an int save. Not a lot of enemies can make that. So we're going to be really happy to pick that one up here, but of course all of the classic vanilla options are here as well. The problem with this build is that we are playing pretty much a whole sorcerer here, which means that despite having all these amazing spell options that fit the build, we just can't take them all. But at level 10, we're also going to get another Metamagic option. You get to choose between Extended or Distant Spell. I think Distant Spell is more likely to get some usage if you really want to go for like long-range snipes, since we're going to have a lot of maneuverability around the battlefield. So I think Distant Spell works quite nice. At Sorcerer level 11, you get the ability to spread your Draconic wings and embody the dragon within to fly at great distances. Is what I wish I could say, but unfortunately it just gives you the regular ass fly with no special animation. It should have given you spectral dragon wings. Come on, Larian. That's a bit lazy, even I can say that. But there are mods that add wings to the game if you really want to go down that route, which you absolutely can. But hey, having a flying speed is pretty damn good with our movements. With basically having 18 meters of movement speed here for this fly action, we can get to places across the battlefield really easily, allowing us to go for long-range snipes if we need to, or get right into the thick of things if we need to do some tanking, because this build actually has a bit of tanking, surprisingly. I mean, obviously Draconic Sorcerer gains a little bit of extra HP compared to regular Sorcerers, so you know, that's pretty cool. We also do get access to level 6 spells at this point. And I would say we've got so many cool options here that we can go over, so let's take a look. Like I say, all the previous level 5 spells are available to you. There is also Psychic Crush, which is just 12d6 of psychic damage, just to say screw you, and can inflict Psychic Crush, the condition, which means that the creature cannot move or take actions, bonus actions, or reactions, and it has to make an intelligence saving throw at the end of each of its turn to potentially remove the condition. As a capstone for this Pyrokinesis build, I quite like that one. We can also grab another spell replacement if you like at this point. If there's a spell you find you're not using very much, again, we have a lot of concentration options. You might find that maybe Agnesar's Scorcher is not being used over Scorching Ray or something like that. You know, you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons of each. I would say you could probably ditch Agnesar's Scorcher at this point and instead pick up, and this is kind of a fun one, so you know how we get Mage Hand as a Githyanki? Well, let's boost that up with our new psychic power and go for Big B's Hand, giving us yet another summon that can create a magical hand that can push people, punch them for force damage, pick them up and throw them. It can do a lot of cool things. It can even prevent enemies from moving by just grabbing them and holding them in place, which means you can just fireball them. It's a really fun kind of idea to just expand on the basic abilities of the Githyanki, so we're going to pick that up here. And at Sorcerer level 12, we do gain access to one more spell. It's entirely up to you what you want to pick here. We've kind of got everything that I would immediately want to grab, but of course, something like Hold Monster is extremely powerful. Telekinesis is really, really nice here. It's entirely up to you what you want to grab. It's a pick your favorite type moment. I would also, and I'm going to go with Hold Monster because it's a powerful spell and I want it. Next up, we also do get to pick another feat at this point. Now, if you are not using a piece of equipment that would boost you up to like 20 charisma or something, you would take an ability score improvement here and bump this up to a total of 20 with Auntie Ethel's hair. However, there are a bunch of other options available to you if you want to go down that route. First up, let's have a look at some of these down here. Maybe you didn't want to use Auntie Ethel's hair, and you are going to use a piece of equipment to give yourself a +2 to charisma, like the Birthright Hat, or the sword that I'll be getting into in a minute. You might take the telekinetic feat, which would allow you to shove people telekinetically with an invisible mage hand, as well as give you a bump to your charisma, rounding it out. There's also telepathic, which does the same thing, but gives you the Detect Thoughts spell. There's Fey Touched and Shadow Touched. Fey Touched would give you Misty Step, which would make sense for a build like this, as well as being able to bump up your wisdom, intelligence, or charisma again. There's Eldritch Adept if there's something you want from there. There's Crusher. Chef could be fun, you know. Gotta give some love to the chefs out there. But yeah, I'm just going to take an ability score improvement and bump ourselves up to a 19, but there is a ton of options available to you here, so pick your poison. And that is the build. Where is my character? There she is. Zoom out a bit. There we go. What you're going to get out of this build then is just damage, like a lot of damage. You've got fire damage out the backside, which we ignore resistance on. Not immunity though, do take care there. We've got massive psychic damage attacks that can absolutely debilitate our opponents. We've got a lot of battlefield utility and exploration utility with things like Mage Hand and Flight, as well as the ability to use like Enhanced Sleep and Misty Step, such like that. We just have a ton of different damage options, and we're a very versatile caster thanks to our Sorcerer stuff with a total of 14 sorcery points, which is absolutely whopping. Now, obviously, people may think this is not a very interesting build because we just took 12 levels of Sorcerer, but hey, sometimes you just got to take 12 levels of Sorcerer, okay? I don't do that very often. There's usually a 1-level dip of something in there, at least. And heck, we even get a goddamn dragon. And a big hand. We get 2 summons. This is kind of a diet summoner build as well. There's just so much cool stuff to this build. Obviously, the big caveat being that it is rather concentration heavy, so maybe you want to swap out some of the concentration spells you're not using as much, maybe like Wall of Fire, for maybe like another big attacking type spell or something with a bit more utility like Misty Step. You know, just something to give yourself a bit more to work with in terms of what spells you can cast when you're not concentrating. But we just have so much going for us here that I can't help but looking at these spells that we have and just think, you know what, this is a good selection. I'm happy with what we have. But now, of course, obviously with the spells that I picked, there wasn't really a lot of opportunity to get into that idea of the immortal continuously rising as they fall, basically never going down in combat. Well, let's talk about that with the equipment, because there's a lot to go over. So, obviously, we have a few pieces of equipment here that you may have seen on the channel before, which basically are anti-death things, but let's go over it in order like I normally do. First up, my sword of choice for this build is the Duke Ravengard's Longsword. Now, obviously, most people don't like to really get this weapon because your method of obtaining it is not great unless you're playing an evil run, except if you check the wiki page down below, which I include for all the pieces of equipment in the description, you will find that there is now a good route way of getting this weapon. It's a bit of an exploit, but it's not one that I think is going to be patched anytime soon, but it's just going to let you get this sword without needing to kill anybody important. So, but what this sword does is it's going to allow you to, whenever you kill an enemy within 9 meters, you gain temporary all allies, I should say, sorry, gain temporary hit points equal to your charisma modifier, a minimum of 1. So with our charisma modifier being quite high, because especially since this weapon gives us a +2 to charisma, we are going to be able to give our allies a lot of temporary HP. It's also going to come with the ability to use Commander's Strike, allowing us to direct an ally to hit their foe, allowing them to get an extra attack on their next turn by using their reaction. So overall, this is a fun little sword that's going to give us a big boost, and if you want to just use that +2 charisma from this weapon to get to a solid 20 charisma, you don't really need 22, but that gives you options for another feat, maybe to replace the hair if you don't want to use it here. Like I said, this is a pretty good sword to get into the late game to just kind of help cap out your stats or go over the usual limit. Also, of course, bringing back a classic, the Darkfire Shortbow, giving us resistance to fire and cold damage, so we don't need to use that level 6 feature to get it, and a usage of haste as well. We're not proficient with it, so we can't really use it with this build as an actual weapon, but everything else that we get on it is just a passive effect, so there's no reason not to have it here. But for the early game weapon options here, because obviously this is an Act 3 sword, we have the Knife of the Undermountain King, which you can obtain, ironically enough, from the Githyanki Crash in Act 1, which will allow you to roll a critical hit on a 19 or lower, and whenever you roll a 2 or less on the damage die, you can reroll the die taking the higher result. That's not just with this weapon, that's with any attack you make, spell or otherwise. It also has Shadow Blade, but unfortunately that is bugged. That feature does not work, so hopefully that gets fixed in the upcoming patch 8, which I'm really excited for. But another cool sword option if you want to lean into the Githyanki storyline that you'll be going down is the Silver Sword of the Astral Plane. Minor spoilers for an Act 3 questline here, but because you're going to be going against Vlaakith, you will end up allying yourself with Kithrak Voss, which by completing his questline, he will give you this weapon. This does a 2d6 of slashing damage plus an additional 1d6 of psychic damage if you're a Githyanki, which, surprise, we are. Which, again, we can use this pretty well because it's a +3 enchantment, which meaning we still have a +2 to hit, even without even having a negative in strength, so you can combine this with like Green Flame Blade to actually do some significant melee damage if you do want to play that Githyanki Gish, and again, you can use the Sorcerer Quickened Magic trick to basically have War Priest on this build, which is the bonus action extra attack with limited resources from War Cleric. So that's an option for you there. But the main thing you would have this on for is basically the lore stuff and the passive effect, gaining advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws, resistance to psychic damage, and immunity to charm, as well as a unique extra attack here called Soulbreaker, which does more psychic damage and can potentially stun enemies. Overall, it's here for the lore option as kind of a cool quest reward, but I do think you might get more mileage build-wise from the Duke Ravengard's Longsword. However, this is still a cool thing to have. Moving on to the equipment, we have the Hat of Fire Acuity. I think this is probably one of the best kind of head slot items you can have for this build. Whenever you deal fire damage, you're going to gain Arcane Acuity for 2 turns. Arcane Acuity means that you have a +1 bonus to spell attack rolls and DC for each remaining turn. So every time we deal fire damage, which can be a lot of times in a turn depending on how you use your Metamagic, you're going to be building up large stacks of Arcane Acuity, which are going to make it so that our saving throws for both our Psychic and and fire spells are going to be really hard for our enemies to hit. Of course, every time we take damage, that duration is going to get reduced, but because we have things like shield bumping up our AC, that's actually not going to matter much. I found myself not actually getting to like below half HP very much with this build because our AC would be so high, so and all the healing and recovery effects that I have built in here. So yeah, I actually think this works pretty goddamn well here. So I think the Hat of Fire Acuity is probably the best you can get, just the more you cast your spells, the better they get. However, there are a few other options here, namely the later game options being the Pyrokinesis Hat and the Helm of Baldur. The Pyrokinesis Hat will allow you to, whenever you deal fire damage with a leveled spell, of which we have plenty, you burn yourself and gain an additional bonus action that round. So you can actually give yourself 2 bonus actions, which means, combined with Sorcerer, if you really want to burn all your sorcery points, you can go for an absolute Nova round of damage with like 3 spell casts, which could be pretty insane, but I don't think it's 100% worth it on this build. But I thought if I didn't point it out, someone else would, so there you go. Your other option is the Helm of Baldur, leaning more into this like warrior who constantly recovers type thing. This will allow you to heal 2 hit points at the beginning of every turn, as well as having a +1 bonus to armor class and saving throws. Those saving throws will help with concentration saves, so that's quite nice. You also are immune to being stunned, which I think does make sense for like a full power Githyanki just being unable to be stunned, and also attacks cannot land critical hits against you. If you find that you are still hitting your saving throws on your spell save DC fairly often with this build, and you don't think you need Fire Acuity, this is probably what I would go for if you're not placing it on a more martial focused character. That extra healing fits with the build theme, the stun immunity fits with the build theme, the bonus to armor class and saving throws helps greatly, and the critical hit immunity is going to just make us really, really tanky. So if you don't care about Arcane Acuity, this is the best thing to get, and I think it fits the build absolutely perfectly. So those are your options, but the Hat of Fire Acuity is your earlier game option regardless. You can get it pretty much right at the start of Act 2. Next up, the Cindermoth Cloak. This is just here to make it so any creature that damages us in melee range receives burning. Yeah, we basically now just have fire raging so hard that it starts to spill out of our body and burn anyone who gets too close. Huh. Why does that sound familiar? Anyways, moving on to our armor choice, which is the Armour of Agility, adding our full dexterity modifier to our armor class, and additionally we don't have any disadvantage on stealth checks, and it gives us a +2 to our saving throws, which is really going to help with concentration saving throws, even with our slightly lower constitution. Overall, it is the perfect piece of armor for this build. That uncapped armor class modifier will give us a 20 AC overall, which is really, really nice. However, if you did end up swapping your constitution and dexterity around, you might want to pick up a different piece of medium armor, which can include our early game option, the Psionic Ward armor. If the item detects that the wearer is a gift, we gain resistance to psychic damage, which is nice. And if the wearer succeeds at saving throw on a spell, we heal 1d4 hit points. So that kind of fits into the regeneration aspect as well. But of course, the other options that would be available to you would be clothing, since Draconic Bloodline does give us mage armor without having to actually cast it, basically by just having dragon scales on our body, which is kind of fun. So again, things like the Potent Robe would be available to you, but I do like these 2 pieces of armor for this build. But any kind of medium armor or lower will work with this build, so just pick your favorite here, especially in the early game. Next up, the Reviving Hands. Whenever we heal a creature, which can include ourselves, that creature gains the effect of Blade Ward. So if we have a consistent health recovery, we constantly have resistance to melee damage. Huh. Also, whenever we revive a creature, again, includes ourselves, we gain the effects of Death Ward. And Death Ward makes it so that the next time we would die, we just get reduced to 1 hit point left. Basically, we can do this all day. This is a very, very fun piece of clothing that will work great for us. We also gain access to strength saving throws +1. Don't know why I felt the need to point that out. And we can cast the Revivify spell once per long rest. Obviously, we won't be able to cast this on ourselves if we're downed. But of course, then if someone else revives us, if we have a party cleric, then we're going to get that Death Ward effect as well, which is great. I would say this is the piece of armor in the build that could be replaced the easiest. You could pick your favorite for this here. It really doesn't matter what you put in the slot. I just felt like this had a nice synergy with the build kind of that I was going for, so I would recommend picking this up. But in the other game, you can grab the Daredevil Gloves, again from the Githyanki Crash. There's a lot of good stuff there. This gives us a +1 bonus to spell attack rolls, which is great, and your ranged spell attacks are made as melee spell attacks while you are adjacent to a hostile creature, so you can cast Firebolt in close range and not have any disadvantage to hit. This does have also like a unique interaction with some other pieces of equipment, because technically it changes Firebolt into a spell, which can actually trigger the Pyrokinesis hat, when normally you'd have to use a leveled spell. But in this case, by using the Daredevil Gloves, you can trigger the Pyrokinesis hat with a cantrip. It's weird, but it does exist, so there you go as a potential combo. Next up, the Hell Dusk Boots. You cannot be forcibly removed by the foe's spells or actions, and you ignore the effects of difficult terrain. Nice. I mean, we have the ability to fly anyway, but still, nice. And whenever you fail a saving throw, you may use your reaction to succeed instead. Hey, did the enemy somehow finally manage to get a hit on you? That's going to force you to lose your concentration on your powerful spell? You just get to say no. Unfortunately, it's once per long rest, but hey, if you're in a big battle where this comes up, you're probably using all of your spell slots anyway, which in case you'll have to long rest afterwards anyway, so there you go. You're also going to get access to Hellcrawler, which is going to be an upgraded version of our Misty Step that incorporates the Dragon's Fire, allowing us to teleport to an area and deal 2 to 16 fire damage where we land, in a 3-meter impact zone, as a bonus action once per short rest. So now we have 2 teleports per short rest without taking Misty Step as a spell, and one of them is enhanced with Dragon Fire, which I thought was quite cool. Ignore the name Hellcrawler, it's actually Dragon Crawler. No, it's called Hell Dragon. Dragon Crawler has some weird implications. But of course, for an early game option, you can pick up the Boots of Striding, meaning that when you cast a spell that requires concentration, you get momentum for 1 turn, meaning that you get a bit more movement speed to move where you need to get into a good position. But also, while you are concentrating, you cannot be knocked prone or moved against your will. Basically, so you concentrate on a powerful psychic or fire spell in the early game, and then you just kind of don't get knocked prone, which means because if you get knocked prone, you automatically lose concentration. This can help with that. You get these extremely early into the game and fit perfectly on this build. Now, for the rings, which really are going to make up the kind of crux of the theme of this build. First up, the Periapt of Wound Closure. When downed, you automatically stabilize at the start of the turn. So when you go down, there's no death saving throws. You are not dying today, you're getting back up somehow. And it also comes with potent healing, so whenever you are healed, you restore the maximum amount of possible hit points. So again, it's a bit of a buff to like general healing that is applied to us, which is nice. This is basically kind of here to help with tankiness, and even if we do go down, we have a higher likelihood of being able to get back up without straight dying. But if you feel like this isn't really being used that often in your version of this build, swap it out for the Necklace of Elemental Augmentation, giving our Firebolt cantrip or our Green Flameblade cantrip, depending on what you're doing, an additional dollop of spellcasting modifier to the damage dealt. So you'll be stacking that twice with this and our feature from Draconic Bloodline, which means Firebolt is going to do a lot of damage. So overall, this is more power, this is more tankiness and reliability. We're going to combine this with the Ring of Regeneration, which is going to, at the beginning of each of our turns, heal us for 1d4 hit points. With this and the Periapt of Wound Closure, though, we are gaining a guaranteed 4 hit points every turn. 6 if you stack this with the Helm of Baldur. That's a decent chunk of healing to have every turn, especially because if you're downed at the start of your turn, hint hint, even with death saving throws, you just get back up every turn. Yes, you don't have your action and you only have half your movement, but you still have your bonus action, meaning if you need to fire off a quick spell, you can with Quicken Spell. So, yeah, there's part of the Immortal Dragon type bit. You just get up every turn for free. Now, in my testing, I will readily admit, I never actually got to 0 HP with this build because it is kinda tanky and just outputs so much damage that the enemy dies ahead of time. But because of the tankiness, the ability to gain high AC, and the ability to heal, yeah, even though we can revive from death, which we'll get to in a second, you oftentimes don't even need to. This is a surprisingly strong build when it comes to just being tanky, despite being a straight sorcerer. But speaking of reviving from death, the After Death Do Us Plot Ring. Whenever the wearer is downed, they rise once more with half of their hit points restored, so for us that's about a 43, but are gripped by Shadow Possession. This is still bugged. You still just get up for free. You don't get gripped by Shadow Possession. which kind of sucks, actually, because I think that's a nice trade-off to have, and it's fun for, like, themed lore builds and such like that. But this just allows us to say, when we get down, we just get back up, because we can do this all day. And the final thing that you won't see here, but I will mention now, is a psionic ability gained from a side quest in Act 1, where you help a certain NPC named Ammelium in the Underdark. That is called Survival Instinct, which allows you to, when you go down, revive yourself, which with I think 3d4 hit points. I believe that's right, I might have the numbers wrong. Check the description below, I've linked the wiki page to it there, which includes how to get it. Overall, that just adds even more. It's an inherent way to revive ourselves even if you don't use this ring. But of course, if you combine that with this ring, that's 2 revives. Yeah, you just don't really go down with this build. And if you do, you don't. Huh. Yeah, I think I got that kind of Phoenix inspiration down there, didn't I? I'll end this off quickly by saying that we're not using any cap clothing with this build. We've just gone for the actual armor here, and we've coloured it in the Faerunian Colours mod's Tempest dye, giving us this gold, silver, and red look, which is just beautiful. But yeah, that is the build, and what can I say? It's a fun combination. Fire, psychic, and all the other good stuff that comes with it, plus the theming is just awesome, and again, any build where you can summon the dragon is just the best build in the game. I don't care what people think. And overall, yeah, just getting this massive amount of tankiness, the ability to revive from death, if we even go down at all with this setup, and just the absolute massive amount of power that we have with all of our features stacked, with these massive fire and psychic damage spells, and the ability to just use things like Hold Monster and Psychic Crush to just take someone out the game, or deal massive amounts of even force damage with Psionic Blast. Like, you have 3 different damage options here. You even have battlefield control with things like Wall of Fire if you want to go with that. There's just so much cool stuff you can do with this build that all fits like a really fun theme. Again, Pyrokinesis. It's cool. I like it. I mean, there's not much else to say here, although I do have a couple of quick things. So, obviously I had teased on the Discord channel and in like in some videos I did before, that I was going to start the patron build series. So where we had the deity build series before, which was based on the different clerical deities in the game, we were going to do the patron build series, which means we were going to be doing like various builds using different patrons. So kind of like the opposite, but kind of doing the same thing. I've decided to put that series on hold for now. Now, hear me out. The series is not cancelled. It just means I'm going to be doing it a bit later. With the recent announcement of Patch 8 bringing us 12 new subclasses, including a new Warlock subclass coming probably early next year. If I had to guess, it's going to be January, because Larian tends to do this. They'll say, oh yeah, like they did with Patch 7, it's like, oh yeah, it'll come out in October, and then release it on October 1st. So I think it's going to come out in January next year, if I'm hopeful, meaning that we'll get an extra Warlock subclass, the Hexblade. For a series that used a lot of level 1 dips like the Deity Build series, we're going to want that Hexblade. As well as, by that point, many more mods will have come to all platforms for Warlock subclasses. We've already got Celestial, but with Celestial and whatever else may come out in that time, that would give us a lot more Warlock subclasses to work with. There's also things like Remembrance and stuff like that, like unofficial stuff that we could work with. That would make the Patron Build series a bit more diverse in what we're able to select. The Deity Build series was fine because, you know, we have like 7 or 8 subclasses with Cleric, but with Warlock, we're a lot more restricted, so I want to wait a little bit before starting that series till we get more subclasses. The other thing is, again, I've said this on the Discord before, but for people who are just on YouTube, I apologise that I've not been able to stream as much lately. I do plan to get back into streaming very, very soon. I want to play some more games. I want to do some more build theory crafting streams. I actually want to do like a Final Fantasy build theory crafting stream. I think that could be really fun in kind of the interim before we do the Patron Deity build series. But again, life has just been so hectic for me at the moment. Not in a bad way. I've just been busy. You know, I do the YouTube channel, I do my full-time job, and I've been doing just other stuff and being social and all that. So I've just not really had as much time to do like streams and stuff, but I want to get back to it soon. So I'll be sure to make a post on the channel and the Discord when I'm going to go live next, so keep an eye out for that. But yeah, I mean, that is it for me. There's not really much else to say here. I'll be fulfilling more build requests in the next coming days. I want to do some more Marvel and DC Comics builds, stuff like that. So I'll be getting to those pretty soon as well. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.